Chuck told me that it was a midsummer's night just north of Victoria back in 1976 that changed his direction in life. Chuck was testing out a new telescope his late father had made. They were up on a hill where his dad had made an observatory when this silent light came across the sky. The way it moved quietly over Victoria, then Esquimalt, then over their heads before shooting up right into space and out of sight. It definitely had them scratching their heads, and it's led to a lifetime of questions for Chuck since that night 38 years ago. His experiences have led him to put pen to paper, writing on a daily basis. It's almost become an addiction, seeing if this so-called ET craze is real, or if it's just being covered up really well. Chuck has found himself immersed in literacy, trying to figure out the 5 W's of the UFO phenomenon. Who are they? What are they, and what do they want? Where do they come from? When did they start coming to Earth? Why our planet? Chuck's quest for knowledge has led to more questions than answers, but he believes his groundbreaking research will open up the world's eyes as to what's going on. As well, Chuck believes we should have and deserve very human answers to the questions that are out of this world. From government cover-ups to everyday people seeing craft in the sky, it's what keeps Chuck searching for those answers when answers are very hard to find. Chuck likes a line his father gave him, and it kind of turned into his mantra while conducting research. When researching, don't let others determine your opinion. No one knows for sure, so don't be gullible. Sounds so simple, doesn't it? But can we? We'll soon find out. Please put your hands together and welcome Chuck Vanderbyl.
That's okay, just leave it there. No. Thank you, David. It was an excellent. You see, what I worried about when he first came up with this was that it's going to build me up to such a degree that I wouldn't be able to follow up. So thank you, David, for that. I also want to thank Johnny for inviting me. Most of you who have already delved deep into the UFO community probably are wondering and looking at your ticket going, who in the heck is Chuck Vanderbyl? I ask that on a daily basis as well. But one of the things that came into there, and the reason that I wanted to so desperately to be part of this, especially since it's the first one, is because of one, Johnny, who's a very good friend of mine, and two, the lineup. And I have to say, for the first two people that spoke, let's give a rousing hand to both John and to Samantha. They both had done an excellent job. All right. As Dave alluded to earlier, my father was a very, very powerful influence on my life. The reason that I followed so much in what he asked of me towards his dying breath, if I can get into that kind of a choked up mode there, my father asked me to continue two of his personal goals. One was that he was trying to find an energy source to be able to power an anti-gravity machine. He wanted to do what the UFOs could do so easily, and he said there has to be a way. He said, you promised to continue my work. He left all sorts of documentations, drawings, so on, and there's been a lot of interest on my side of it, and it's coming together. But I had to do something that was more for myself. I had to find out what it was that I was interested in. And I had to ask some questions. So one of the things that came up is is that thing working? There we go. A man may imagine things that are false, but only can understand those things that are true. Sir Isaac Newton. Those words stuck with me just as much as my father's at the time. My father said, on the day that Dave described, that evening, you have to take a look at it from the point of view. I now can see all of Machosen from our vantage point on top of the hill, hundreds of feet above our house, which we trekked tirelessly. Sorry, I'm just getting a little overwhelmed. The whole idea was I was 17. My dad said, pick this up and carry it up the hill because I'm going to finish my telescope this summer. I didn't want to do that. No. I had other things to do. But no, he had me slugging this zigzagging up the hill. But when it was all finished and we can actually take a look at what my dad had hand-built, a complete telescope, every aspect of it, the computer drive, everything. He was using a Commodore 64. He figured out everything, wrote his own programs. If I could be half as smart as my father, I will be very, very happy. That's the idea, and that's the kind of thing that made my father very, very important to me. So we were sitting, we were looking at across, and as Dave said, a light goes across Victoria, it comes over where the military base of Esquimalt is, goes over the water just slightly, does a 90-degree turn, and comes over our heads so fast that we both went like this and fell over. My dad said this line, "This could be good or it could be very, very bad." Now, it's all about point of view, isn't it? It's all about point of view. My father was in Amsterdam the days the German tanks came rolling down the street that he lived on. That scared him. He saw technology that he had never ever seen before. He started to see planes flying overhead, big, massive ships out in the harbors, all of the things that would make someone, especially in those days, get a little nervous about one thing, technology and, as he said it, advantage. When you have technology, and we all know this has been a thing across all of the internet thing, the most powerful weapon is intelligence, knowledge. You can have a gun, but if you don't know what you're doing, it's all about advantage. So, that kept me going. There's 7 seconds between each one of these screens, by the way. I know that because that's the program I chose.
To the conquest of space, we have grappled with the truths of our beginnings. But what if the question of our origin falls outside the realm of social acceptability? What would happen to our culture if we were to discover that we, as a race, are no more than the result of a genetic experiment conducted by a superior life form?
The Sumerians point to the Anunnaki as the creators of mankind, our own benefactors of life. According to Sumerian text, the Anunnaki, in advance of landing 445,000 years ago, sent androids to scout the Earth. 150,000 years later, the Anunnaki themselves arrive and create humankind. How was Adam created? According to the Sumerians, it was by genetic engineering, fertilization in vitro, in a glass tube, as depicted in this cylinder seal rendering.
Adam was the first test tube baby.
Okay, that's the normal things that people see on TV all the time. That's the conditioning that's out there, isn't it? That's what we are all led to believe. So, going back to what my father said, don't let other people make your opinions. So, at this point, let's see, we're getting into our next scene. Then we have Charles Darwin. He comes from a completely different point of view. He sits back and says, we all came from apes. Okay, some. 1924, pull far stronger, 847 pounds with one arm. In comparison, a fit human can only pull 210. Further tests, a 100-pound chimpanzee deadlifts 600 pounds. A gorilla over 1,000 pounds, actually the number is higher, but there's been some discrepancies on that, with ease. Now, if the Anunnaki were really, really smart, you think they wouldn't go for those ones instead of the human? Gorilla's diet is plant food. Take a look at our diet system. It's massive. We've got to have all these different things, and according to the Canada Health Act, we need to have all of these things, all of these different foods in order to survive. Look at all the people who are on steroids in order to become strong like gorilla. It doesn't happen. So I took issue with the whole idea, the concept that we were a slave race to work for the Anunnaki, to dig for gold. I really take an issue with that whole thing. The idea of us being born to go out there and dig gold. But if you take a look at this guy, we all know who he is. Got to take all of everyone's point of view. We went from having thick skin and fur to wearing fur. Isn't that interesting if we follow the time? But let's take a look at what I mean by the killing fields. On this planet, everything that's outside can virtually kill you in no time flat if you do not know what you're doing. You go to the beach, cut your foot on a barnacle, walk out onto the gravel, then back onto dirt. See how long it takes for your foot to all of a sudden have a whole bunch of critters. We are very susceptible to anything that's out there. You go and have scorpion bites. We're ill-equipped to survive. Take a look at this building. If all of a sudden we had a bunch of bugs coming inside this building, how fast do you think management would call the good old exterminator? We create our own spaceships, folks. We may not be traveling the cosmos, but we certainly live in a bubble. Because in order for us to sleep carefully, we need to make sure that our home is what it is today. So, once again, Anunnaki, they want us to work. Well, there's another aspect to when it comes to all this. Jim Marrs, Alien Agenda, every book is about conflict. Really, it is. So we have aliens come down, they abduct people, they do a whole series of experiments, and then they send you back and put you in your bed, and you wake up none the worse. Now, is there not a doctor on this planet that wouldn't exchange a whole bunch of information with any of the ETs for that little tidbit? To be able to do that to another human being without having to do incisions? There's a lot of abilities that the ETs have been showing us. Sandra alluded to the fact that they look to her as her spouse, as you said earlier. They can change and change their shape. They can look to everyone out there a little bit differently. So right now, I am kind of George Clooney-ish. You see, that's the type of thing. I could convince everyone that I am someone who I'm not. So I still take issue with the whole thing about the Anunnaki and we're all going to be slaves. There are abilities. What worries me is how those advantages are being taken into play. I totally agree with Samantha. There are benevolent races out there, except here's where I might take a little bit different slant on it. When all of us walk back out the door, there is still the news full of war, atrocities, rape, you name it. There is still things that we as a species are not doing properly. We are not attending to it. If we learn too much about what the real agenda, according to the cabal, to the government, if we only knew what was really going on, we would sit back and be horrified. But yet someone still has advantage, don't they? They have the knowledge, and we have to piece it together a little bit at a time, draw it in and say, okay, how do we take a little bit of information and find out what the real meaning is, and what does it mean to us? Now, the reality, of course, Jim goes right out of his way to make sure that we are very well aware of the Barney and Mary situation where they got abducted and the regressions therapy that went through. There are so many things that goes on there. Linda Howe told of one of the Roswell aliens died due to unknown causes. So in other words, there's a story, there's some conflict. We let one of our visitors from another area, another region of space, and we didn't call home and say, we got a sick alien here, can you come, what's going on here? We're not being very compassionate if that story is true. Those are the things that, once again, makes me a little bit suspicious of what's going on. So in actuality, what were the gods after? Okay. I'm looking at, to breed man back in the day, you had to have a massive infrastructure. You had to have food, lodging, you had to have some sort of medicine to be able to help these new beings that you've just created out of a test tube, just like Zacharias Ditchin says. Okay, all right. Has anyone tried to get a 2-year-old to dig for gold? Samantha has. And how were your endeavors? They didn't work out so good. All right. It's massive, 9 months of pregnancy. Go through all this, and then you find your little one has decided to go chase something. What are the Anunnakis going to do? Come on. I waited 9 months, now there's 2 years involved, now you're 3, now you're just looking at the little bugs. I got some gold. Come on, let's get some digging done here. Okay, you got to negotiate with a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old. I know my little grandson is just a complete, absolute joy to be around. But he's got his own agenda, and it ain't mine, and it ain't his mother's. And then, now you've got 16, maybe 12 through 17, and what are the Anunnaki going to do with these guys? I'm telling you, Get a job has a whole new meaning, don't you think? Completely new meaning on what's going on. You can't get these guys out there to dig gold unless you give them something to look forward to. I am putting humor into this because there's a couple of points that I really I want to get this history part of it out of the way. And so that we can see that sometimes we're being told something that really doesn't really fit the agenda. Now, if we come right down to it, the Holy Bible gives us an indication of what the gods could have done. If you get into Exodus chapter 20, you should read it one day. And you're going to find out exactly what everyone thought that they should do in order to solve every single problem. And I'm going to let someone far more popular and far more famous explain to you what the result is.
Silence! I kill you!
There's another side.
According to British ufologist John Spencer, Barney and Betty Hill's story was the wake-up call for the phenomenon of alien abductions.
For many years, one of the aspects of UFOs I've studied in some depth is the abduction phenomenon, the idea that people are manipulated to some degree by UFO entities, that they are taken aboard the flying saucers, that they are examined usually in some medical way, that they are sometimes given a mission, or they are perhaps implanted with devices and so on, and that they are constantly throughout their lives, and even their children's lives and their children's lives, are affected by UFO intervention, which seems to be tracking the bloodline, which I think Bud Hopkins has described in many cases. And
tracking the bloodlines. Now, as we go, all these little things that I say will all start to make sense, because the rabbit hole that I'm going to be bringing you people down has tunnels. And every time that I step into that rabbit hole, I see a tunnel, and I have no choice but to go down it. The thing that's very, very fascinating is my origins basically is I'm an armchair historian. I don't have the funding to go around the world to check out a lot of these things. I do rely on other people's investigations. But I found a very, very fundamental flaw. And I don't mean that as to actually say that the person who's done this research is incorrect. I found a flaw in how the methodology goes into it, because human nature is about point of view. It's what my point of view is, and how I'm going to look for things in history, and how I'm going to tie them together. What I've done is I've taken so many different points of view, I've narrowed them all down, and I brought them down to one point in history. And there's a point in history that shows that we, as humans, have actually got a lot more abilities and a lot stronger, and I mean gorilla strong, than we have ever been led to believe. So join me on my journey.
That track.
And this is Alfred.
And
Another
some
point
the
of view.
track, and this may be disinformation or not, is that people report negative stories around graves. For example, there's a whole strain of super soldiers that say, oh, there are alliances of some grays with Draco reptilians, and they are part of a conspiracy or part of an exopolitical alliance to eliminate humans and make this a reptilian planet. Is that something that has any reality to it, or do you hear anything about that at all in this reality?
I do, and it's not as much, there is not so much information on that as I would like to corroborate it absolutely, but certainly some of my clients, even in regression, will tell me there are greys living under the surface that are working with the military, and these are, they say, are renegades from most of the other species, so there are some that are self-serving, including reptilians. One case said that were two species of reptilian that were very benevolent, and there was one species that was very self-serving. So there does seem to be factions where people are exposed to all of that and that they are working with the military. And and also my understanding is from some of those that have seen the military bases that there are programmed life forms that are cloned from genetic material of both reptilians and the greys that are programmed by our military to emulate the abduction, so the person believes it's a real extraterrestrial abduction when in fact it's a military orchestrated one with these programmed life forms. And some of the experiences have told me they have been taught how to tell the difference. And a number of experiences have told me that. They know automatically, if they're not in fear, they know automatically the difference between these. So we're looking at some species that are self-serving, it seems to be. There are some that are programmed life forms in military bases as well, which is adding to the complexity of all of this, that are self-serving and are doing their best to portray all intelligences as negative and self-serving, which of course is not what I'm finding from many of those that speak to me, including, and I mean, for me, the children have a veracity because of the purity of their information. They haven't been seeing talk shows, they don't read books. The clarity of how they speak when they mention, this 9-year-old mentioned the reptilians that are working on some of them and certainly self-serving, some of them. But then again, I've had others that have had the most amazing, loving experiences.
So another interesting thing is...
Okay. In all fairness to Mary Rodwell, and thank you to Alfred for allowing me to use that clip, she spent the majority of that interview talking about all of the good things, similar to what Samantha had done. But it's that little piece in there that makes you start to think. When there's an alliance, a 2-to-1, I don't care whether it's 3-to-1, but somebody's aligned with the military complex. That kind of worries me. As a human being, getting around my wire here. Oops. Okay. As a human being, I think that there is still a little bit of open observation that still needs to be done. We need to know a little bit more about what our military, what our government, what our taxpayer dollars is actually going towards. There are so many photographs Mike Barra has found from NASA that's been redacted, what's been out there. He's got all these controversies, and it's all because we can't handle the truth. Little truth at a time might make some sense, but the reality that comes into it.
The ETs consistently emphasize the law of one, that
David
we're all
Wilcock.
part of one conscious, continuous energy field. So then what he says here is, the inevitable conclusion is it was all real enough and these people from elsewhere were probably just what they claimed to be. Their science was alien and possibly forever beyond our comprehension. That's the science I've been teaching you about today. That's this new stuff. Another approach was tried in philosophy, and here the answer was found in all its grandeur. I will not go into detail of the many revisions of basic thinking that we had to go through, except to say there were many. The people from elsewhere displayed great patience and understanding, and what they stressed is the basic oneness of the universe and all that is in it. Science, philosophy, religion, substance, matter, and energy are all facets of the same jewel. Notice he uses the term jewel, just like that jewel at the heart of quantum physics, the same title on that paper that I showed you before, the so-called amplituhedron. They're all facets of the same jewel. And before any one facet of the jewel can really be appreciated, the form of the jewel itself must be perceived. This is 1958. And now the science is catching up. Because it doesn't matter that it was in the 1950s. The people talking to him were time travelers that had science and technology way more advanced than we do now. They also told him, without any equivocation, that the human form extends all throughout the universe, which is, again, very interesting for us now. So here's the page where that is revealed. And we're going to go into a quote right here, where he said, "One of the most important things I had to realize was that we are not alone. The human race in the form of man," and again, it's 1950s, so that wasn't sexist yet. "The human race in the form of man extends throughout the universe and is incredibly ancient. Also, its appearance in physical form is but one of its many manifestations along its path of progress. That's very interesting. What he's saying is that we start out as a human physical flesh and blood body, but ultimately we transform into pure energy, and that's the next level of human evolution. That's what the Tibetans are all about. That's what the rainbow body is. That's why 160,000 people following these Tibetan Buddhist teachings I'm going into tomorrow, they actually got their life to transform. If you really go through the discipline, you can do it at any point. And the key is if every thought that you think is a loving thought. Now,
That was W.B. Smith in 1958. Those are very, very important observations of the time. Let's pause this for a second. We have to sit back and really think about what we are doing on this planet. Now, I'm going to say everyone is well aware that our eyes convert our thought, what we see into electrical images, and our brain only receives electrical impulses. Our hearing, our sense of touch, all the senses are done. And I happen to be one that sits back and says, you know what? I like a nice sunny day. I like to go to the beach. I like the human form. David Wilcock says that W.B. Smith is saying that there is a human form all through the universe. Yet, this body dies and we go through a metamorphosis. If it was all about rising our consciousness into energy, then everyone would be committing suicide tomorrow. But that's not the reason. Samantha pointed out that there are so many things out there for us to enjoy, and that we actually volunteer to come to this planet because she hit the answer right on the nose. This earth, the one that we live on, the one where we get our nutrition from, what builds our bodies, what gives us our days and our nights, this whole environment is so precious that this is what we're standing up for. We are part of a much larger community, and it doesn't matter how many ETs are out in the universe. There are animals everywhere. There's every bit of life in every single corner of this world. It's all fighting to exist at the same time. And that is a marvelous energy. And that's why I feel that we're here. But how are we able to then move on? Now, this is the Palladian speaking. This came off the internet as well.
Consciousness and the flowering of that consciousness to empower all people. Do not think that the forces of shadow and darkness, that they can overcome you. That you are a puny little nothing, and that what can you do compared to these powerful giants and reptiles and global elites and whoever else, Anunnakis and all the ones that you imagine are so big out there. You have consciousness. You are a conscious being. And the timing is such that it is your duty to watch that grow into magnanimous proportions. The clues and the keys that our vehicle shared with you this morning, we advise you to apply them. That is to always be grounded in. Because once you are grounded, you cannot be fried. Do you understand? Why do you think the electrical outlets everywhere and all the electricity that you have is set to ground? Yes? If it's not, things fry out, they burn out. That's what happens to humans. So, stay grounded. Have a nice strong aura. The stronger your aura, the stronger your protection. Your job is to prove to yourself and to set a legacy for humankind of a new way of being, a simple way of being, a way that lifts off the fear, a way that creates a new blessing for a new era, and that is where you are at now.
Made a very good point, didn't she? But she also acknowledged that there is forces out there that don't have our best interests at heart. Now, Samantha says that they're all of love and light. I totally agree with her. But we still have to be cautious about what's going on, because the amount of destruction that we're doing to this planet, not we as in this room, but I'm just saying as a human race, we have to then say, well, give us some tools by which we can able to stand up on our own. And that's where we're going to be heading to. Okay, let's go back a little bit more on history. According to the scriptures, Scott Roberts wrote an incredibly good book about the rise and fall of the Nephilim. It's a very, very well orchestrated. He was a Baptist minister. He decided that he was going to step outside of the whole realm of religion and start to really delve into the research. And he came up with some very interesting observations. According to Scripture, offspring of the sons and God women were the Nephilim. The human women became pregnant and they bare great giants whose height was 3,000 ells. Don't know what a 3,000 L is, but it's got to be big. All right. For the men out there, this won't make any difference. But for the women, you look at the size of me. My mom was 5'5.5". She was very proud of that ½ inch. Very proud. It was back in 1956 when I was born, and they did not have cesarean. So when I was entering this world, I was 12 pounds even. I don't think there's too many women there that would want to have that type of child. And when I came out, I had rolls of fat over my kneecaps. You have pictures. I was going to bring one here, and I thought, well, I better know my audience before I start doing that horror show. Can you imagine, though? Okay, so the scriptures say this. Now it's all metaphorically speaking. We have so many different ways of interpreting this information. I bring this up because there is still something to be said about history. If we ignore it, then we're kind of doing ourselves a disservice. We're putting ourselves into a little bit of a shell in a bubble. We don't want to do that as a human race. We must respect everyone's point of view, and no matter who and where it comes from. Now, there's some very interesting... Oh, well, you can do it. Oh, long 7. Samson was born to an unnamed human woman in Judges. Made pregnant by an unnamed angel. You can all read that. This watcher. Now, isn't that interesting? We now have someone who calls themselves a god, who has been respected as a god, but can heal. Now, I just want you to know that every single one of these frames, I had to narrow down from a 2.5-hour talk because I knew that no one was going to be able to listen that long. So I had to bring out the things that make sense to where I'm going. And where I'm going is going to probably surprise a lot of you. Has anyone ever heard of the little town called Saint Medard in Paris? Raise your hands if anyone has. Port Royal? 1700s? How about Louis XIV? What, you guys been in a cave? All right, let me set the scene. It's the 1700s, it's early 1700s. I'll begin with almost the middle of the story, and then we'll step back a little bit to do these tie-in, which I'm trying to bring history into a better focus. Because when I first started reading this thing, I went, hey, if I could make this into a fiction story, I'd be wealthy. I'm still writing that fiction story, and it's been 5 years. And every time I turn around, I find something new. That's what I'm bringing to you right now. Okay, Louis XIV. He out-survived all his children. Does anyone have any idea how many children he had? 40. Pretty close. He had 17. He outlived them all. He lived till age 77. The average age in Paris was 38 years old. It was deemed the most dangerous city in the world. Louis XIV actually was the first man to conceive and put together a police force to protect the people. There were battlegrounds. He was fighting 3 wars, 2 simultaneously, 1 prior to it. Here he is now fighting the Church of Rome. They've got this bull. It was called I can't even pronounce the word properly. I should have got this organized a little bit better, but it was an ingenist. And what it was taking away power from the king. The magistrate, the Parliament of France, was trying to strip away powers away from Louis XIV. He was being pulled in all these different directions, not to mention how many women he was being pulled in all these different directions with. But he was sitting there being inundated with all this information, and then a thorn in his side comes along. And it's called the Jansenist. Cornelius Jansen. He was a Dutch Christian believer, formed a beautiful theology based around the life of Christ. Became very, very powerful because he could cure people. The Jansenists could cure. 1721, still in the reign of Louis XIV, the port city of Marseille is completely devastated. 100,000 people died in less than 3 months. One ship came in with a disease from the Philippines, and the first person that brought it off came with the rats. 100,000 people died in less than 3 months. Now that's got to say something devastating. All these people were praying to the Church of Rome, going, you have to save my child. It didn't matter. The whole city was basically decimated. Now, it recovered very quickly, but you can look that up on your own, how it was done. It was very, very well done. But the city got quarantined by Louis XIV. No one could leave. It was very, very tumultuous time. In comes Francois de Paris. 1727, he dies at the age of 36. He was the deacon of the church, of the Jansenist church. He vowed poverty. He sewed socks for the unfortunate. He lived in one of the most dangerous areas of Paris. He was the martyr. Everyone loved him. He was so well known. People started to make pilgrimages to his home, to his tomb site. They were cured. But what was interesting was they were cured of every known disease. There were 12 instances that were particularly noteworthy because the Church of Rome was then being called upon to verify that these were actual cures. These were miracles. Ephraim Radner wrote The Spirit in Nature. Fascinating book. I had to look up 9 of the 10 words in the sentence. I did not know one of the words because religion has its own language and its own dictionary, to be very honest. It was very, very difficult to get through it. But he did tell us a very interesting, his side of it. It was all based on his point of view. Where it all pinnacled was not only were people being cured of every type of disease, some people were their legs were short, one leg was shorter than the other. Now I know all of you are now looking at your ticket going, okay, I paid how much to come here? Where is this guy coming from? The thing is, though, is that it was all documented by one man and verified on multiple levels. Multiple levels. Cardinal Montaron, he wrote 3 volumes of books, presented it to the king, and got thrown into jail for doing so. Now, historically, there was another writer. That was Ephraim's. This one here was $152 on Amazon. I found someone who sold it to me for $35. And he wrote it from the political point of view. That's where I got all my political side of what was going on between the Church of Rome and the takeover, the Parliament. There was so much going on at that time. And in all of this, they were trying to squash the Jansenist religions. Okay, that in itself was room for a whole big fight. But what was very, very interesting was that in 1731, that was Robert Kreisner who wrote that particular book. We'll get into it a little bit later. I'm not going to go too far into it. This is Adrien Lepage. He was the one that first came to Saint Medard and introduced Cardinal Montaron to this situation. Now, when Carr entered in, this is Francois de Paris, all the names around him are all the people that he saved. Over 2,000 people were cured of every known disease known to man. Blindness, deformities, paralyzing, everything was cured at his tomb site. So Montaron comes in and he heads towards I put that up there because he was born on the same day I was, except a lot earlier. He was credited with saving over 2,000 lives. But he'd been dead for 4 years for him to be recognized as a saint, and it never went through because of all the turmoil that was going on. This is a photo, this is a drawing that was done of Montaron presenting his book to the king, which was now Louis XV. Because in 1725, Louis XIV died. Here is one of the people, abnormal union of bones, complete immobility, and she was able to get up and walk within 5 days of visiting the tomb. Spanish nobleman, blind in the right eye, suddenly recovered the use of his eye again. People from around Europe. I know you're all saying, what's this got to do with ETs? It's coming. They were all declared cured. Philip Sergeant, deformed right knee. But in 1731, it got a little bit interesting. Montaron, I'll set the scene. You have buildings on your left. You have the church to your right. You have the cemetery right down the middle. Courtyard, fountain behind me. Carter Montaron gets out of the stagecoach, walks with his friend LePage into, and he hears crying from a woman, screaming of agony, absolute agony, to his left. There's a stone wall as a walkway, it protects a walkway that was beside the buildings. This woman was in complete convulsions. This is what it was termed back in those days. So anyone had one of those tightening of the calf muscles, you wake up and, double that, and now put it on every muscle in your body. And that's what she was screaming about. Now what's interesting about this is that it was written down in detail. Her name was Jean Mollard. There was a farmer who had his cart, who was watching the proceedings. She begged for someone to try and help her. So people would go over, and one person happened to fall into her and caused her some pain, but it was external pain. She says, that felt good. This pain is, do that again. She finally convinced, trying to shorten the story up, finally convinced the man had a cart, he had an iron bar. He took it out, and she asked him to strike her. So he did. Of course, it was gentle. Didn't want to hurt her, but she was already in convulsing pain. So she begged him to do it again. Sweat was pouring off of his head after the 50th blow. She finally screamed at someone else. Another man picked up the bar in front of Montaron, in front of LePage, in front of doctors, everyone that was there. So he struck her again 50 more times. Actually worked out to 101. There was a small child calling out the numbers as the fellows were hitting her. She finally stood up, not one mark on her body. Now that's curious in itself. So, of course, I'm reading this and I'm going, okay, they must have had some pretty interesting drugs back in those days, because that ain't what I'm going to. If you come hit me, I'll fall down. I'll cry. I'll fetal position in the corner. Don't worry, I'll be there. But this wasn't the only case. 811 people who had the convulsions, all with different abilities. Abbé de Bouchard was, when he finally touched the tombstone, he went into the convulsions, he lifted up off the ground in front of hundreds of witnesses. There's now 2,000 to 3,000 people milling about this courtyard. See, isn't it interesting that nobody's heard any of this stuff? Thing is that Church of Rome plus the government went out of their way to stifle all of this information. But what was very interesting, and where this goes a little bit deeper, was that Carter Montaron spent some time detailed talking to people who are in the throes of convulsions, and he found that the deepest, darkest secrets these people could read. So just imagine, you walk up to a person and you know their deepest, darkest secret is like a rolling film in front of you. Now that in itself is kind of scary for most people, isn't it? But yet they could do that. A series of clairvoyancy and prophecy of an individual's future. They could actually recite this. And what was very, very fascinating about this, they say there's a discrepancy. It's about either 900 or maybe 800, let's say 850 people. 85% of the people who had all of these abilities were women. Gabrielle Moeller, Jean's sister, could take what they call a rapier, which was a single dagger, put it up to her eyeball, and you could not penetrate it. Now, in 25 words or less, I can't convince you all, but I do implore you, take a look at it. It's all on the internet. But if you start to go down this rabbit hole, trust me, you will continue to keep going because there are many, many facets of this. The reason that I'm saying this is that there was something that we're not being told. That's why? How did this possibly happen? Exaltation of mental awareness. Command of language is not their own. 11-year-old girls talking in languages that had never been heard before. Articulating. Conversations with each other. All of a sudden, they are looking at things with a completely new eye. They would look at a tree or a stone, and they would be absolutely fascinated at it. Complete mental awareness. 2,000 people. State of ecstasy. Now, isn't this an interesting thing that happened to human beings? Contemplation of objects, which is superior power discloses. These are his words, written back in the 1700s, translated, of course, from French into English. Eyes fully dilated. Sounds like drugs to me. Pretty much on that. Women were the most clairvoyant, the most able. So I spoke already of Jean Millard, 1731. Could not penetrate her eye. Gabriel then proceeded to put her head into a fire. Now, it didn't get burned. Amazing, isn't it? So is that saying something that of this time frame that there's got to be some anomaly that goes along with that? Well, no, there's something in history. We go back to our good old Bible, Book of Daniel. These 3 men were thrown into a burning fire so hot that it actually burned up the people that were throwing them in. And they walked inside the fire. You can read it yourself. It's right there. It's got to be, maybe it is true, maybe it isn't. But it starts to make you think, okay, what happened? How did this all come about? What was this is an example of what the sword is that they would actually literally fight with. Gabriel, Madeline, and Felicite was brought to the king's chaplain, and they demonstrated that they could do this in front of the king. Got thrown in jail for it. The Bastille. Now, it all started with a friend of mine giving me this Holographic Universe book, and Michael Talbot does an awful lot of explanation of different abilities that humans have got, that they can able to reach into and able to draw from. On an Egyptian newsletter that I get about ancient Egypt, they said that humans, according to the ancient Egyptians and Sumerians, had 360 different abilities, separated abilities. I emailed them for a list because I'm kind of wondering how many of them I got and how many I don't got. But he started, he went into it. Now, once again, point of view, isn't it? We all want this to happen, but can you imagine what the world would be like? So, where else in history? Yeah, well, Michael Talbot. I started looking up this one. The Camisards. Jean Cavalier wrote a book, got exiled, after he got exiled from France. Same king. He sent Abbé de Chalais from the Church of Rome, went down to the southern part of France, and was going to get rid of their little sore, another one of those thorns in the side of the king. Get rid of the Camisards. They were Protestant. So they went down, they successfully burnt their village. When they shot the muskets at the women, children, and the men that were there, the musket's ball, the actual bullet, penetrated the clothing but lay flat against the skin. They couldn't die. So there we go. Another Another interesting thing in France. So what is it about France? So this is what gets me very passionate about this topic, because then it goes down to Port Royal, 1665. Marie Perrier, her very well-known father, Pascal, brings her to the monastery for the Jansenist religion, drops her off. She has this growth and this sore on the side of her eye that debilitated her entire face. She's 5 years old. She's now becoming paralyzed in her shoulder. The nuns don't know what to do. Neither does Pascal, neither do the doctors. Everybody signed off on her. They figured that she was not going to live. An unknown benefactor had brought to the church a thorn said to have come from the crown of Jesus Christ. A nun picks up this thorn and touches it to the most, the mucus point of her eye. Within 5 minutes, her eye starts to get better. Within 15, the paralysis in her shoulders disappears. Within 1 day, folks, her face started to come back. Within a week, there was not even an evidence at all that she had been sick. Now, I said earlier that the average age in France was 38. She lived till she was 84. She outlived everyone that had ever been a problem because everybody else was dying in power, and she outlived them all. She was there for Saint Medard, surprisingly enough. This was the mystery of the Holy Thorn. It was so important to the people of France in those days that the queen came and verified the miracle on her own because they all looked at it from a religious point of view. Now, we can go on, we can say the Jansenists were great, the Church of Rome not so good, or they're really good. You know what? Religion has nothing to do with this. What it comes down to is that when we're getting into the history, we go back. Let's make sure I got the time frame here on this. I'm not expected to live past your 5th birthday. We already see it was 81. I kind of went with 80. It was 84. There's been other ones in there. But now Moses is known to, according to the book of Exodus, abilities. The Levites in history were pretty important people back in their day, or at least that's what Moses wrote about. If we take a look at the manufacture and actually construction of the Ark of the Covenant, it works out to about 2,700 pounds. That came from Graham Hancock. It was figured out that the 9 inches thick, this much gold, couple of gold cherubs. Now you got 4 people with wooden poles carrying this thing with bare feet into the battleground. It's pretty amazing strength for that part. Levites of the Bible, yeah. I know in the future now I can go a little quicker. It was perfect in my office. This was an interesting one. Chapter 32. Moses comes down. He doesn't get instructions from God now, according to him. He gets mad at Aaron and decides that he's going to massacre 3,000 of his own people because they wanted to. This goes back to that killing fields I said in the beginning. You know, if you want to get control of people, you got to start killing them. And then all of a sudden people will start paying attention. Not exactly the type of world I want to live in for that part. But Moses, the Lord said, my spirit. Now, this Genesis goes back to Scott Roberts because Genesis is kind of an interesting thing. And now I'm going to take you to the last part of this so you can get an idea of where I'm going with and what I think is happening. Here was a situation where I don't know too many human beings. Has people heard about this fellow? Interesting, isn't it? Doctor verified for 15 days. There's some astounding people on this planet with abilities that I think are very, very important. I got that verified. They watched him for 15 days and they kicked him out. He did not eat. Now, okay, collusion, we can take it in all sorts of different directions.
The Count of Saint-Germain at the court of King Louis XV is said to have helped Marquise de Pompadour look like a young beauty for as long as she lived. Old aristocrats claimed that the Count didn't age at all during the half-century that they knew him. The Count died in 1784. Others say people saw him in Venice in 1938, nearly 150 years later.
So the convulsionists, when they finally, all the convulsions had reduced from their bodies, they were able to withstand any physical torture, any physical harm in those days. Most of them got put into the Bastille. But I figure that they've escaped. So here it comes down to it. Now, I said earlier, it's all about point of view. Ephraim Radner talks in his book about the religious miracles, the grace of Christ. He goes through that. He has got chapters dedicated to all of the miracle cures, and he compares all of them, including the holy thorn, to that of a religious aspect of it. Keisner, he goes at it from a political structure, but he brings in things that I didn't know. He also he brought in the information that miracles continued in Holland and Amsterdam around tombstones. Isn't it interesting? The dead are bringing people, healing them. So we got Francois de Paris in Saint Medard. We got in Holland, in Amsterdam, we now have another 80 people cured. Back to the Port Royal, there was another 80 people that were cured. We're talking thousands of people who are cured of every type of disease. All of them documented, all of them verified by the people of the day. Okay? There's got to be a reason, right? We all sit back and say, okay, there's got to be a reason. This is way too weird for anybody. So here's where all of a sudden the little clues come into it. And this is where I'm going to be heading into for the last part of this part of the presentation. When their bodies touched the marble or the limestone that they made the tombstones out of, that's when the first initiations of the convulsions or any of the cures was starting to get into play. Later on, people were taking soil from around the tombstone and were putting it into wine, red wine. That'll come up in a minute too. All of a sudden, people are moving away from there because the king shut the whole area down. They brought in the military. In Holland, they brought in the military to ban people from going into this church where this other person was saving people. Port Royal was completely destroyed by the king in those days, back in 1665. They murdered all of the nuns. They destroyed. Oh yeah, this is all documented. Everything's into the history. You just got to know where to dig. There was documentation after documentation after documentation, everything about that. And it's all been nicely tucked away. And it's been really tough to get all of it out. So now we've got soil. We've got touching of the limestone and the marble of the tombstone. So now what could that be? We're starting to get a little bit of the clue coming into there. What is it that could possibly be out there that could turn every single human being into a wondrous, open, and fully protected? And I'm sure that there's a lot of women in here that have had that in their mind. If they walked around a corner in any one of the cities in this world and went down the wrong street, they would be worried. There's men out there too that would sit back and go, hey, I'm in the wrong district. But it was proven back in those days, 1700s, that you could be impervious to harm. It wouldn't make any difference. A bullet wouldn't be able to stop you. There's other ways, of course, but the thing about it is that all of a sudden you have got something more. Where did it come from? Who brought it to us? What was it all about? If we watched Ancient Aliens, they would say aliens did it. Wouldn't they? Because everything's about the aliens. That human beings did nothing. I kind of agree with some of the things, the direction that they're going into, but to be honest, I think that we as a human race, and if David Wilcox is correct that the human form has been around the universe for a long time, then I think that we have to identify that we are capable of being more than what we've been presented with at this stage in our lives. That we do have abilities, and we are a greater, more loving people. Because I can tell you that if all of a sudden you take away food, water, and air from any one of us, it will bring out a side to you that you would not want to see at any time. You take away, with a stroke of a pen, all your money, and what happens? There's that type of control that I don't like to live under. And that's the slavery that a lot of the people refer to when it comes to the cabal. So I'm saying it's time to look for something more. So we go back to This is the Book of Enoch, Johnny's best book he's ever written. That's right, you penned it yourself. The Watchers. Now, the Nephilim were the offspring of the human women that the Watchers played around with. I was going to say had sex with, but then that wouldn't be appropriate. Anyways, I just did. So there were 13 of them, and each one of them was tasked with teaching humans specific things. And one of them was this man, or entity. Amaros, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Resolving of enchantments and castings of spells. So, I wanted a little bit more information. So on one afternoon, it was kind of raining, I decided I was going to have some very light reading. I decided to pick up Margaret Bunson's Encyclopedia of Ancient Egypt. Yeah, it took a little bit to get through. I only got to the D's because all I had to do was get to this little instrument of information. Just want to make sure that I give credit to where credit is due. In the 4th century, he was called the famous healer of Erythibus. Now, he did something, it's only a very small section. There's not much more information, and I've been digging around to try and find out more. What it says here is that he was able to cure people of the effects of scorpion stings, snake bites. How he did this was he made a stone and endowed it with magical spells. Victims poured water or wine on the statue. You can read that. The spells thus absorbed reportedly cured everyone. Hey, the Egyptians, maybe there's some validation to what went on into Saint Medard, because they took the time to write this down. Does that mean that he's wrong too and everybody else is right? I look at it and say, okay, now he used it on his statue. Now, what did he make the statue out of? Guess what, folks? It's called limestone. The same thing they made the tombstones out of. Do you think that there's somebody who hasn't figured this something out? Now, Amaros was tasked with teaching humanity. So humanity gets to learn this. So I just love this quote. You've got to see everything. It is all important. Everything around us is important. So that leads me to the only area that's left. Good old alchemy. So the Watchers, they're a god. They come from, this is the picture of the fellow that wrote it. Now, does anyone, just make sure I got the right section here, everything exists connected with every other. Isaac Newton. I started off with him. How many people, raise their hands, know that he was an alchemist? 4 or 5. Isn't that interesting? It took him, what, a couple years of his life to do the old mathematical problem thing, then spent the rest of his life, 38 years in alchemy? He's a pretty bright guy. To think he was unsuccessful? Or is there something else behind the thing? Because guess what? He dies a month earlier than Francois de Paris. Isaac Newton was an expert in 5 languages. 3 of them were dead. He had permission from the church to read all of the information because he told the church he was going to find out more about the writings of the book of Daniel. They gave him carte blanche access to all of the monasteries in Europe documentation. Can you imagine what that would be if we had a chance to do that? Now, I'm not saying that Isaac Newton was the one that did all these cures and so on and so forth. I'm just saying that maybe there is a little bit more to alchemy than what meets the eye. Now, everyone who's understood alchemy, they've all been given this fairy tale little story from, might as well from high school. It's all about changing lead into gold because everyone loves gold. It wasn't. So we go back to what I set up. People only lived till they were 36 on average. Can you imagine? What would be your principal thing to do? Is maybe be healthier, maybe live a little longer, spend some time with your grandkids, instead of You're 15, you're now having children, and by the time you're 30, you're kind of looking, okay, where is my grave going to be? Which site should I? Because you're already planning your funeral in the last 5 years of your life. That was the average age. Only a few people actually made it past that point. Saint Germain was one of them, but that's a different story. But he came from the same region. There's something in there, folks. There's too many stories that interlock in there. So the idea is that alchemy has something. There's something in there. Now, as I'll just let this roll through, getting close to the end here, folks, as I know you're probably a little tired of sitting. Joseph Farrell wrote The Philosopher's Stone, and that's really opened my mind into taking a look at what really can be going on. He demonstrated that in the same time frame, 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s, alchemy was a success. And more than one occasion, they actually produced gold. Here's a list of the people who actually made gold in front of mint, directors, all of the people that are the emperor. Several people made it to him. The Swedish general. I mean, everybody was working on it. They're all over. Alchemy was a real thing. It wasn't magical, hoo-hoo. There are three more. They all produced gold. And it was minted and it was put aside in the king's possession. Moses, he was an alchemist. Because we all know, when he came down, got mad at Aaron, he burned gold into a powder. Well, we all know you burn gold, it's going to go into a molten state. But he made it into a powder, put it into water, so it was water soluble, and made the people drink it. Okay, so once again, are we going to believe that? Or is there some version of truth in there? Or there's something that we're not being told? Is there a document out there that actually told everyone who was in power that this could be available to every human being, but if you give it to them, it's going to change the way this world is? And the people who are in power, they may not want that. Now, I'm going to make a little bit of fun with Samantha. If Samantha could be able to read everyone's thoughts in here, and be as clairvoyant, there would be a lot of people who would sit back who are especially in political structure, anyone in authority, who would be very nervous to have her come into the room, wouldn't they? What if everyone was becoming that way? There would be no place on this planet that those people who have been trying to enslave, to try and destroy what we have, try to control us, they couldn't hide anymore. And then all of a sudden we would have a different world, and the one that I think that we are heading towards. The reason that I brought this all up is simply because Samantha is right. Everyone who understands that there are life forms in this universe that's out there. We are all part of a community, and we have to start asking the right questions. The right questions of how far can we go? What can we do to protect ourselves? And it's a call to arms in its own way. Now, I'm not saying that you go out there and get some red wine, throw some soil into it and say, well, that one didn't work, but damn, it tasted all muddy, right? I'm not saying that. But I'm asking all of you that are here tonight, if you come across anything at all, I have cards I can give out to people, and you email me, because it's very difficult to be the only person on this bandwagon. But I do think that there's something more to it. And even if somebody sits back and says, "You poppycock," that, in a nutshell, let's see what else I've got on here, because that's the alchemist's rule: a mineral stone, a vegetable stone, and an animal stone. In all of alchemy, red wine is used. All of alchemy, red wine is used. The more I look into it, there we go. And that is my presentation, but as one little plug on my side. I've been writing a science fiction series called The Secourists, which in French, actually in English it means the protectors. I take the reader on a fictional story, because this is not the only thing. I found the Kogi in the Columbia Hills. I have found people around the world. And what I'm doing in my storyline is I'm actually putting together a different way of looking at human history. A different thought. But the idea right now is that it's in a fictional story because that's easier to get across. It might palette much better. And I don't have all of the scientific backing to get me on board to sit back and say that it's going to be a non-fiction style book. It's not there yet. But in my research, I have come across things that just don't add up. So I've created a fictional story. And it'll bring in things that will actually surprise some people. So I feel that it's going to be a very good read as soon as I can get it past my editors. And it's going to be something I think I'll be very proud of and that I can hand down to my grandson and say that this is something that we're working towards. I feel that with everyone aware, start to look, start to dig, question everything around you. This is a call to arms. Let's see what we can find out. Because I know that if the Watchers, Armaros, gave this information to an elite group, they've got it hidden there. And somebody, as far as I can tell right now from the evidence, found this out in the 1700s, and instead of trying to make a dollar off of it, he put it into someone that would protect it, which would be in the hands of the religious, to give them the credit. Because in 1727, 12 miracles happened at the tombstone. Many more happened in Amsterdam. But what really sparked it was in 1731, 4 years after Francois de Paris had died. And now he's credited with saving thousands of people. I think that there was more to play than just he himself. There you are. I hope I have enlightened you. Yes?
Have you heard about George Washington?
Not yet. Enlightened.
Okay, well they say that he was, like in the French and Indian Wars, he was just riding through point blank, not point blank, but crossfires and everything, and nothing happened to him.
There was many reports of, especially in, I'm trying to think of the time frame, back in Nebuchadnezzar day when they were doing the massacres, there were always one or two people that could able to be the leader. It was the basis of the David and Goliath stories. It's also the one that was just the Troy story. There's a whole series of people that were impervious to harm. Yes. About Patton, yeah, he walked through a hail of bullets and that sort of thing. There was also there was one movie that had Vietnam where this one fellow just was so confident he walked through, Viet Cong all around him, and he never got one shot, not one bullet wound at all in all the time that was there.
So is it something you can actually touch, or is it a state of being?
I believe it's a combination of the two things. What I'm saying is that we live on this planet. We consume foods. We need nutrients. We know that the GMOs are not a good thing. Okay, we pretty well accepted that in our ideals. We want things that are natural, that has the proper mineral content. We all know that minerals are what keeps the conductivity of the brain, what keeps the electrical connections going. We have all of those things. We survive on this planet by the food that this planet provides for us. That is not to say that we cannot be more by understanding that there is the prima mater, the principal material. There's one more thing that's been taken away from us.
Hmm? I mean, we have access to any food that we could possibly want, but it hasn't created a race of happy people. There's still something missing.
Exactly. Which is what I think that whoever it was that was putting, and I'm calling them a secret society, I don't care what you want to, how you want to label them, but somebody figured out something back in the 1700s, because this went from 1649 right through to 1775. The final book that Adrian LePage sold, because nobody made any money, folks. Isn't it typical? Tesla, we can go down the list of all the people who really never made it rich from all of their inventions and everything that they've done. Montaron basically died a pauper. LePage had to sell his last book, and guess what was that book? The list of all the names of the people that were cured. He wrote them all down. That book is hard to find now. Yes?
So are you saying the Watchers are with us always, or just for that period of time? Are they here now? That's one question. And I also have heard of kind of Chinese elders up in the mountains in China who are supposed to be hundreds of years older.
The Hansa, yes.
Would that be related?
That's absolutely related, because once again, there's still a miracle cure. There's still something out there that hasn't been figured out yet. But to go back, the Watchers, I know that right now I don't have to feel, I don't have to have someone touching. I know my father and my mother and all the people who I love, because I've lost a lot of good friends. I'm 58 years old, and I lost a lot of friends between the ages of 40 and 55. And I tell you, I know that they're with me on this. I don't have to, I don't feel that I'm clairvoyant. I don't want to make that a point just yet, but I'm just saying I know that they're there. If I know that they are there, then I know the Watchers are there too. And I hope that kind of answers your question. Yes, Alfred.
Yeah, I'm not at liberty to give out his name and the exact location, but it's in northern BC. And I've been there, and I have a photograph of myself holding a gold ingot. And I watched while base metals, generally lead, were transformed into gold by a gentleman who is an alchemist and who has a worldwide reputation as such.
Mm-hmm.
So that does exist.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the anecdotes is that he was invited to a meeting at a rural location in the United States with some other alchemists and people who wanted to put together a consortium for a new currency. He decided not to go. And at that meeting, black helicopters descended and they were all shot to death. So
Somebody wants to keep the secret, don't they?
yeah,
I've heard so many stories of that.
yeah.
I mean, that's the one thing I don't want to have happen in my place.
No, I understand. So what I witnessed was that A, the gold is alive. B, it's a male and female process, and there's a male and female, male sperm kind of.
Mm-hmm.
And in the base metal, and then out of that comes the gold. There's an actual mating of the metal, and it transforms into gold. It's a miraculous process. And he has a whole room full of gold ingots that have been transformed to base metals. This is just scrap metal
Mm-hmm.
that he collects.
You may be aware of this, but there's a person out just off of Highway 10. He takes a microwave oven and he produces gold. You've heard of that? Hey, who's heard of that? I heard of, yeah. No one's heard of that? Okay, give you a quick. Yeah, John Hutchinson. But this fellow here, what he's done is he's taken an industrial microwave, puts in ground up glass beer bottles, and he produces gold. The problem is that the cost of the electricity to get the gold is more expensive. But he's figuring out a way to be able to do this. So what he does is he takes and extracts the gold from the glass, the silicate. So what he said is what Alfred just alluded to. If you have the right conditions, the flour is the gold. It wants to become the gold. So we still have that mystery. Why does everyone treasure gold? Why do the Anunnaki go after gold? There's still a lot of questions that are out there, without a doubt. Anyone else? Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah, you spoke about the state of being where we're impervious to harm. So do you believe that that's something that we can unlock at any time soon as human beings? Like, how would you just walk around and, like, say, dodge bullets or, like, take the bullets at point blank?
Absolutely. I can't wait to do that tomorrow. I'm not making fun of you. I'm just saying. I believe that they believed it, okay? And I believe that there's something that bears investigation. I don't think that there is going to be that many people out there that after they start to review this, you're going to look it up. I know you will. It's too attractive. The whole concept of being able to raise this body into a more powerful being. Yes, it can be skewed on both sides. It could be used for good and it could be used for bad. They say that about alchemy. They say that about nuclear bombs. We all know this, but I think that the fact is what was really intriguing to me was that whole thing about being able to read the deepest, darkest secrets. that these young girls could be able to see this, and this wasn't just one or two. This was all of them. So that ability immediately changes how people are. Because just approaching Johnny, I know everything about him. I don't have to go through the hi, how you doing, how you been. I know exactly. That's a whole different way of looking at it. Is that something that I would want to see everyone enjoy, like tomorrow? Take a sip and say all of a sudden you got this collage of everybody's, secrets and coming at you? No, I don't think that. Yes, exactly. So would it be by steps? Absolutely. Would everything that's been done needs to be approached with reasonable caution. You've got to look at it from step by step. What I feel that the convulsions was an overdose. Because one of the things I didn't mention, because I didn't want to take up too much more time, was the fact that Jean Muller and Gabriel were not ill. But when they got involved with the people who were ill, all of a sudden those convulsions came into play. So it was like an overdose. All of a sudden your muscles, everything has gone crazy.
Or an exorcism.
The proponents against the convulsionists went on that tangent. How could God do this to one of his children? Put them in this kind of condition? How could that? The devil must be involved in this. Believe me, every aspect of this thing has been covered. Ephraim goes through both sides of it completely. He says who it was that, and he'll name it. There's like 20 or 30 people who are saying this is absolute malarkey. Everyone that looked at it. The fact that still remains is that there's all the documentation. There's all the people that were involved. This Montaron did his due diligence. Yeah, he was a little bit passionate about it because he changed over to Jansenism, believing that it was that religious faith, their dogma, that was what instituted all of this. Because they were the only ones in Paris doing it. Everyone else is dying by the time they're 36. Marguerite lives till 84. Wow.
Okay. You mentioned something about the Protestants.
Yes, the Camisards. Yeah, they were a Protestant group, yes.
Why were they hated?
Because at that particular moment in time, Catholicism was trying to get control. They were trying to get control of the king, and they were doing a masterful job in Spain. When you start looking at that history, you start to see all of the subversive techniques that were being played in the background. The Parliament of France was trying to take power away from the king, and the political upheaval that was going on, it was absolutely... All of the bishops in Paris, for example, they bought their way in. Some of them hadn't done anything else. They just, here's some cash, and all of a sudden they became a bishop or a cardinal. They basically bought their way in. So the political structure was absolutely massive, and there was so much corruption going down the road there. So yeah, everyone trying to protect their jobs. So there is still that aspect of it that you had to go through there. But what was interesting was Jean Cavalier wrote the book while he was exiled into England. And what was fascinating about it was that it also showed up in Newton's library. I have a copy of it. I found it on Google and figured out how to download it. But the idea is that he wrote about the experiences of going down there, literally building the fire, putting the leader of the Camisards into the middle of the pyre, lighting it on fire, and the scathing, I don't want, the flames all around him. He walked out of the coals, not one burned, his clothing was still intact. The stories just keep going and going and going. Like I said, there's tunnels to this rabbit hole. Once you start down it, be careful. Yes, Samantha?
Could it have something to do with their Merkaba?
Could very well be. I believe that there's a lot more to it. There's been, in some of my investigation, there's been a little bit, and I can't verify any of it because I didn't get enough of it by the time this conference came together, but moving from dimension, just stepping out of the realm, but still in existence, where all of this damage was being put in, being applied to you, this burning and so on. So that could very well have been the situation, because when you go back to the book of it was Daniel, where you got the three, they're singing praises to the Lord all through this middle of this big oven. They're being burned and they're walking around. So yeah, that's got to be a metaphor for something. But the reality is that when you start to take all these different things and put them together in one little concise row, you kind of go, that's coincidence, so that's coincidence. See, all of a sudden these are similar. Yes, in the back.
When a soul comes in and out of your body, when you're in conscious form, you go into convulsions. It's happened to me. You
Very good point. And it could also be the simple fact that you've also got protection. It could be the angel that that could be there. As Samantha, would eloquently say, you've got people around you all the time that are there to protect you. But the idea is that the human form, and this is where I keep going into it, the human form is important, folks, or else we wouldn't be here. If it was that simple, because really, what does the government look at us all as? We are a number. You know what that number is? How much garbage we produce. That number is what the government is now looking at each human being as. How much can we do? So the idea is that we still have purpose on this planet, and we still have journeys to go through, and there are beautiful things to see, and we need to capture and bring that back. So there is going to be a lot of people who are going to be protecting you, and I totally 100% agree with you. Trying to put this as an interesting factoid, I haven't quite reached that point because I haven't found enough to support it, but I agree with you. I agree with what Samantha has to say from earlier, and I use her because I believe in what she is saying, that there is supposed to be a better way. Now we have to know is how to ferret out the people that are causing the problem. And I think that we still have to do a lot more research. We have to believe more in who we are as a people than what is going on and what comes down to the pocketbook. Although the pocketbook would be nice to keep keeps the bills going sort of thing.
So I wonder if they have that healing water at Lourdes.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of miracles happen there.
Yes.
And you said water, so.
Well, there's another talk that I'll be bringing up in there is that I figured out, boy, does that ever sound self-serving, huh? There is Egyptian folklore, and there's Sumerian folklore that all represents itself around water. And between what I have garnered from YouTube and other people talking, Alfred being one of them, there is a lot of information out there. Water is absolutely pinnacle. And I figured out how the Cabal move from one entity body to the next and keeping all of their memories from one life to the next life. I think I figured it out. Now, I stand up here with a microphone and go hang around my friends and they'll kind of go, okay, Chuck, you've been on way too many drugs. You got to get away from that doctor because that prescription's not helping you. But I think I figured it out, and there's enough documentation to back it up. And that's the thing. The more that I read, the more that I start to say, it's from my point of view. I'm looking for something of this nature. And sometimes I have to push a lot of stuff off that desk to say, this is taking me on a wrong path. I need to go this way. So I figured out how they did it. And another one of my talks that I'm hoping to be able to put together is I figured out how the lunar lander landed on the moon. And I can introduce you to the man who developed the technology in 1947. I figured out that one as well. That's another self-promotion, folks. Any more questions? Well, I have to say thank you very much for letting me talk to you this afternoon. And again, Johnny, thank you for inviting me. And I hope that you were all entertained with the information that I brought to you. And it leaves you with something to look into or look towards as much as I have. Thank you very much.